Hey everybody, Mark here. Today I'm going to be talking about one of the most important tools that I use when mixing. This is an essential part of my workflow. It's called referencing. A reference is a professionally produced, mixed and mastered piece of music that you can either purchase off of your favorite music store or stream off of a high quality streaming service. We have to be careful not to stream things directly off of a normal, standard definition streaming service because we lose quality from the algorithms they use on those streaming services. I like to purchase stuff off of the iTunes Music Store because that way I can download and import my music directly into my session where I can listen and measure it in an even playing field with the projects that I'm working on. So right now I'm using references while mixing a track that's been produced and written by Colormind. The important thing with references is that it's something that I normally get from my clients that allow me to understand the goal and the vision of their project. A lot of different songs are mixed and mastered differently, and they have different feels, different emotional connections with the listener. Many times the way that they're mixed and mastered can produce a different type of fullness or a different type of aggression that the client wants to convey to you, or possibly maybe you want to use a reference track for your own music so that you understand where you're going. The fact is, if we don't have a goal of where we're going, we're basically shooting in the dark. We have no idea what we're doing, and we're doing it just to experiment. And that can lead to hours and sometimes days working on the same project. Normally, I like to work with only one reference, but sometimes a couple are essential. Maybe you need one reference for the type of aggression that you want, and you want another one for the kind of bass response that you want. Or maybe you want to use a different type of reference for the way that the drums hit. We can use references for everything, from balances in the mix to different types of processing ideas. Now, there's a couple things that we have to remember when we're using references. First, we have to make sure that we're compensating for how loud they are in comparison to the music that we're working on. Secondly, we want to make sure that they're not routed to our master bus or through any limiting or master processing that we may be adding to our project. And lastly, we have to remember that a lot of these tracks are mastered really loud. We don't want to model this in our mixing. So let's talk about the first thing. You'll notice that the first thing in my project that I'm working on for Colormind is that the reference tracks are at the top of my session. If you look at the faders on these reference tracks, you'll notice that they're turned down way below zero. And the reason I do that is because while I'm mixing, my mixes are not as loud as the final master. And the idea with references is that we want to give ourselves a fair comparison between both the reference and the mix that we're working on. One thing that we have to remember is that loudness will always throw off our perception of how something sounds compared to another thing. Now let's talk about the routing of my references. You'll notice that the outputs of my references both say external out. Now, the reason I do this is so that it bypasses my master fader. I don't want these going through any of my master bus processing or limiting because then it changes the way they sound and I lose the whole reason of using them in the first place. If you're working in a DAW like Pro Tools, you may want to use something like a submaster for your mixes and masters. That way you can route your references to your master fader. That way it'll bypass your submaster, which will have all of your processing, and it'll go to your master fader, which will not have any processing on it. Depending on your DAW, you may have to work this in a different way, but the goal is you just don't want to process your references. Now, the last thing I mentioned is that while we're listening to our references, we don't really want to listen to the hyper compression and limiting that's happening on them while we're mixing. As I've mentioned in previous videos, when we over compress things, this will translate to a smaller and flatter master. So we want to make sure that we're compressing things only when we have to compress them. Have a reason that you want to compress things, whether it's envelope shaping, whether it's adding tone or aggression. Just make sure that you're doing it for a reason and not just because. Once you get to the mastering process, you can start listening to the limiting and the aggression that some of these masters have, and you can model that processing on your master fader. A couple other things to remember about references. I love using them because it's a way to just simply check my ears to make sure that how I'm feeling that day isn't affecting frequency response, balance, or anything else that might change because, well, I'm human. Another thing that you can do is you can put meters or spectrum analyzers on your references, and you can actually analyze how the pros are doing their mixes and masters. Check out my website at markberrymusic.com, and also check out some amazing music and other great content at colormindmusic.com. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Keep making great music, do what makes you happy, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care.